the Apostle Peter, at the end of Jesus' life, when he was making it hard for people, and he was saying things like, eat my body and drink my blood, without a Catholic church to explain to them what that meant. It was just super weird. If I said something like that to you now the next thing you have to do is you have to eat my body and drink my blood. And in the Bible, marvelously, it says, the disciples said one to another, this is a hard teaching. It's not, there's no laugh track in the Bible when you read that. So you don't realize what a comical moment, and an awful comical moment that must have been for them. And then it says, many walked with him no more because it was just too hard. They just couldn't figure it out. So then you have this tiny little scene in the Bible where Jesus says to Peter, will you also leave me? But you have no context for that. Had all of Peter's best friends just left? Had his wife left? Had his mother left? You don't know what was going on, what Peter was up against. But Peter's answer to Jesus was perfect. He said, where would I go? Think about that for a minute. He didn't say, oh, I get it. You were just being symbolic. You were talking about the cosmic consciousness. You were talking about the Om. He didn't say any of that. So there's nothing in the Bible that tells you that Peter understood any more than anyone else. But what Peter said simply was, I have no life but this. This is who I am. I am your disciple. Where could I go? And Swamiji explained that whole period in the life of Christ in a marvelously expanded way. It wasn't at all a question of whether Jesus knew what he was talking about. And it wasn't even for the disciples to be intuitive enough to understand what Jesus meant. Swamiji said the test was whether the disciples had faith in their own experience. Because Jesus knew it was going to get really tough. You know, everything was going to turn against them. They would be left bereft immediately. Soon after, their own people would ostracize them. And the only way they were going to be able to go through that is if they were just deeply settled in their own self, in their own faith. It couldn't be coming from outside. It had to come entirely from inside themselves, because every external support was going to be taken away. And Jesus needed a unified core, which is why he made it difficult. Swamiji said that at the end of Yogananda's life, he behaved in a similar way. He started making it hard for people to follow him. Not that he was casting them out as disciples, but he knew that they needed a unified strength to go forward as a group at that point. All of which is to say, as I mentioned to some of you last night, everything we talk about, no matter what we're talking about in the world, we're really, the only reason we're here is to work out our own karma. Because the real drama of civilization is not civilization. It's not what the planet does. Believe me, planets come and go. You know, they're just around for a while and then they're not. They go through higher and lower ages. You never get it straightened out. It's not meant to be straightened out. It's a backdrop for us to face our own karma and come to really understand what life is really all about. And it's a big change. I mean, it's a gigantic, total transformation. This is why in the Bhagavad Gita it says, what is day to the worldly man is night to the yogi. And what is night to the worldly man is day to the yogi. So part of what we have to do is we just have to be willing to just let go of everything that we think is true in order to really feel what is true. I've had one extraordinary dream of living through a past life. It was an extremely traumatic one, and it explained a certain extremely difficult relationship I had. And so that was part of it. But I've also, once I've understood that this is only one chapter in a much longer story, I'm always curious in situations to try to at least intuit, hopefully not just imagine, but what would have happened before that would lead up to this. You know, that you meet someone, you fall in love instantly. You're together for the rest of your life. You know, how does that happen? You meet someone and you loathe them immediately. They're the most terrible person you've ever met. And they have hardly even opened their mouth. Where does this come from? And much more complicated stories. So I now have basically a whole library of stories that are either true or apocryphal. They could be true because they explain what's happening. Very interestingly, in that story that I described that was a real dream, somehow this was in the context of Ananda, and somehow the other person in that dream heard about it. I really still to this day don't know how, because I did not want them to know. So they went to a psychic to ask what I had done to them. Obvious. And they found out that I had been equally horrible to them. I mean, breathtakingly horrible, epic, award-winning movie horrible. So now we're even, like this. And now we are both completely justified in the intense dislike we have with one another. We're completely armed, you know, like this. It got so bad, and again, I don't remember how, Swami Kriyananda had to referee. And he sat the both of us down. First thing he said was, I think these past lives are true, which was, ugh, really, on both sides. But then he said, but both of you have suffered from what you did, and you've changed. And the person who behaved that way no longer exists. Isn't that an interesting way to put it? So instead of being justified in our upset, we were fighting ghosts that were long since gone. You know, and this is, it was a specific experience that I had, but it told me how much of the time am I actually in the present reality, and how many times am I just running a tape from something that just doesn't exist anymore. The problem is it exists in our chakras. Now, in our chakras, there's no, you know, the physical body of whoever did the awful thing to you, or the terrible death that you had, or the horrible thing that you did that makes you constantly ashamed. It's not in there. There's not enough room, you know, for all those physical realities to be there. But what's in there is a vibration of energy that affirms a certain understanding of what is real. Okay? If you really hurt someone to get something you want, everything we do because we think it's going to make us happier. And a great deal of what we do actually causes us to suffer more. But if we knew before we did it that this is going to take us to suffering, we wouldn't do it. Of course we wouldn't. Nobody's that stupid. You don't just pick up a knife and stick it in your arm like that. But we do it all the time because we are confused. We are confused about what is real, what is the purpose of life, what brings happiness, and what brings suffering. Now, the other part of this that we have to understand is our true nature, our real self, is infinite bliss. We have no idea even how to imagine what that would be. Swami has a beautiful song, I live without fear. And the fear has always been a ruling delusion for me, so I've given it a lot of thought. And St. John in the Bible says, perfect love casts out all fear. So if I really knew the perfect love of God, then there would be nothing to be afraid of. So I'm always having to weigh those factors. And I thought to myself, what would it feel like to be absolutely unafraid of anything? And I was just contemplating that. And I have a house that's 2 stories. And I started up the staircase thinking about that. And for the distance of about 3 steps, it's like Divine Mother just opened it for a second. And I felt completely liberated from all the fears that are stored in my chakras. And so for 3 steps, I felt what it was like, and then it closed in again, like that. Now, we always talk about God as Divine Mother or Heavenly Father. And these are somewhat sort of, you might say, almost sentimental images, but what they are is they're an attempt to communicate in words that which we really can't imagine. But we do know, either because we had it in our lives or we didn't have it in our lives, we know what ideal mother love would be. We know what ideal father love would be. So we're trying to speak of something that awakens the heart to be able to tune into that vibration of reality. Because that's all that we're doing in our whole incarnation. We're always making a decision about what do I think is real, meaning lastingly real, and also what do I think will bring me happiness, like this. Now, our Heavenly Father and our Divine Mother, let's think about this like human parents. You know, a little child is 4 years old, a little boy really loves his mother and says, "Mommy, I'm never going to marry. I'm going to live with you forever." And she says, "Well, honey, you might grow up and you want to leave home and have a home of your own." "No, Mommy, I'm going to live with you forever." You know, and Mommy is really touched that her little boy knows that, but she knows that there's a much greater destiny awaiting him. And he's just being childish because he doesn't know. He doesn't know what the potentials of life is. There was a girl in our community at Ananda Village, and her family raised her in a very loving spiritual way, and she became a lifelong devotee. And her mother told her many stories about, you know, the children in Fatima and the Saint Bernadette of Lourdes, and I think the children of Garabandal also, where they all had visions of Mother Mary, and the visions tended to come when they were out in the fields tending the sheep. So when she was about 7, she came to her mother and said she wasn't going to school anymore because she wanted to have a vision of Mary, and it seemed that if she became a sheep herder, then the chances of having a vision of Mary were better. You know, infallible child logic. Mary comes to people who are with sheep. I want to be with sheep. Like that. And again, her mother knew what the impulse was, but she had a vision of something so much more that was coming for her. She couldn't just leave her there. Now, that's exactly why we talk about God as a father and a mother. It's to help us also realize that compared to our own potential, we are just children. Jyotish and Devi had raised a son, and when he was about 6, Devi says, he came into the kitchen one day and said, "I didn't do nothing." And she said, "Where did you do nothing?" Where did you not do nothing, right? He said, "In the closet." So she goes to the closet. He opened all of the jars of vitamins and poured everything out onto the floor, you know? But you know, why did I tell you that? You think, well, oh yes. So we, like children, just decide that we know. And it's actually, it's a very interesting introspection exercise. Whenever you hear yourself asserting a really strong point of view or having a very strong reaction, to just stop long enough and say, why do I believe this? Where did this come from? You know, what is the source? Now, being a disciple, as I have been since I was 22 when I met Swamiji, well, really before that, I understood discipleship. Lineage has always been important to me, and source has always been important. And Swamiji himself, when he said he went to be a monk at Mount Washington after reading Autobiography of a Yogi, within 1 week of reading Autobiography of a Yogi in New York City, he was in the monastery in Los Angeles, initiated by Yogananda as a disciple and living as a monk. And there was just basically one long bus ride across the United States in between. And yoga and gurus and so on in 1948 was not at all well known in the United States or anywhere much outside of India. Swami said he thought the word yoga was actually the word yogurt in some form or another, right? I mean, that's how much he knew. He said he was so overwhelmed by the change. He was totally confident in the change, but it was just such a complete shift of reality. He said he would literally be dizzy sometimes and have to sit down. And at Mount Washington, things were not as rigidly orderly as they became in years after that. And so people were experimenting and reading and doing all kinds of different things. And so but Swami could not always tell among ideas which all sound preposterous to him, which ones were from Yogananda and which ones somebody had just made up. So he would always ask the question, who said that? And if it was what Yogananda said, even if he couldn't accept it because he couldn't understand it, and he had too much respect for his own intelligence, he couldn't just say, yes, sir, if it wasn't completely sincere. But he said, he couldn't reject anything that Yogananda said because, as I was speaking earlier, he had absolute faith in Yogananda's wisdom. It was unquestioned like that. But so what he described is, he said he took whatever Master said unhesitatingly. It had to be true, but not unquestioningly, which is a perfect balance, isn't it? I myself, in being with Swamiji, he would just make such global statements about reality that I just didn't know what to do with them. But I had the same dilemma that Swami had. I knew with every part of my being, and I never hesitated until never, including standing here. Swami always knew what he was saying, and it always turned out to be correct in the sense of a true description of the way things are. So I developed what I just like I had a mental closet with a slightly inaccessible shelf where you store the present your aunt gave you that is so horrible that you can't put it out in your house. But next Christmas, she's coming to visit you, so you can't throw it away either. So you put it up there, right? And then take it down when you need to have it. So over the years, I put lots up on that shelf. And as the years passed, something would happen, and I would realize, oh, Swami told me about that. Swami said that. Swami described that attitude. And then I'd go rummage around in the closet, and I'd find it, and it fit perfectly. Gee, it looks so good. Why was I not wearing it? Because, of course, it wasn't he who had changed. It was I who had changed, right? So we are children. And Divine Mother and Heavenly Father, God, Guru, your guardian angel, what you call it, it doesn't matter. You can call it the great white pumpkin. It's just the power of divine wisdom is there. And it simply radiates its truth. And we think that God's love, it comes to us a little bit, and then God takes it away, and then he gives us another drop, and then he takes it away. That's not at all true. The divine power is constant in everything, at all times, unconditioned, eternal. Think about those words, without boundary. Think about what those words mean. It's we who tune in to the right station and then after a while get bored and click off into something else, right? And we think that we've been abandoned. Just like a little baby, when mommy walks out of the room, becomes hysterical, thinking that mommy's never coming back, because it doesn't have the perspective to know that she hasn't forgotten about you. One of my friends raising her baby said whenever she would sit to meditate, her baby would feel it, because it would be the only time she would actually try to draw her consciousness away from the baby and concentrate on something else. The instant she would start meditating, her baby would start screaming as if she'd been abandoned forever, because she didn't understand. That's what we do all the time. But God our Father, God our Mother, I like to think of God as the mother because she's easier to get along with. Even Master says that. Master in a marvelous just mix-up of genders, said, pray to God as the mother. He is very pleased when you do that. Just tells us what this is about. But just like a human mother knows that we have so much more potential than we ourselves can even imagine. And so we cling to the little tiny things that we have, and we just don't have the faith or the imagination to believe that we're being taken to something much more glorious. And in my own life, I finally come to realize that no matter how difficult the road, and God knows this is the shadow and the light we're talking about, no matter how difficult the road, my mother loves me. And if she could get me where we were going by an easier route, she would take me by that route. Why would a loving mother not do that? Do you understand what I mean? You see how important that is? If there were an easier way, and even more than that, this must be the easiest way to get me there, because this is where I am right now. Now, we have this extremely weird idea, and this is one of those very important ideas. Where did I ever get this idea? That this world should be much more pleasant and easy and more fun than it is. And we're always thinking that something's wrong because things are difficult. And we often think that something is wrong because people are having to work so hard to find happiness. But where does that idea come from? I've sometimes joked that when we incarnate, we write a contract, dear God, I will incarnate under these conditions and only under these conditions, and I'm holding you to this. And then we sign that contract with a flourish. And then even from childhood, we keep waving it, excuse me, do you see? And then finally, at some point, we look at it, and we realize that God never signed it, that it was just something we made up. You understand? It's funny now. It's not funny when it's happening. It's not funny at all. I actually was in a situation once where I was just having to deal with something I didn't want to deal with. I hadn't planned to deal with it. I didn't think it was fair. I didn't think it was, anyway, there it was. I wasn't happy. I was really angry. But I wasn't really angry at the people around me because everybody was doing the best they could do. I finally realized I was mad at these guys, like super mad at these guys. And I was alone in our temple where we have, the ceiling is big and the pictures are bigger. So there was this big picture of all of these guys on the altar. And the reason I was mad at them, I realized, was complicated. I was mad at them because I knew I was going to get through it. And I knew I was going to be fine. And I knew it was going to be really hard. And I was annoyed. I was really annoyed, like Mother Teresa of Calcutta said, God never gives us a test bigger than, she didn't use the word test, but she never gives us a responsibility that is bigger than we can handle. But sometimes I wish God didn't have so much confidence in me, right? That's what I was mad about. I was mad at them for thinking that I could deal with this. Once I got that out of my system, it was okay. I've seldom, this is just off to the side, but I seldom demanded anything of God. But I did once, and fortunately it turned out to be a righteous prayer. My mother had Parkinson's for the last 15 years of her life. That's a fierce test, Parkinson's. But my mother, God bless her, she's a very sweet woman. She didn't have a lot of willpower, my mother. She was a little, she just didn't know how to make it like that. But in the face of that illness, she really did. And about 11 years, 12 years into it, she said to me like this. My mother had no interest in the teachings that I offer, so we never talked about that. She said, I hate to admit it, but this disease has been the making of me. And it was the truth. I know in her next incarnation, she'll be able to take all those wonderful qualities that she has and really make something of it, because she had to fight so hard. It was the making of me. But we all knew as the family that eventually at least Parkinson's can go to the brain, and then you start having convulsions, and it's pretty awful. So at a certain point, that began to happen for my mother. And in my mind, we were in this great big room, but we were in a hospital, so I can't imagine there would be a room that large, but that's how I seem to remember it. My mother had had an incident. We took her to the hospital, and she was she's a small woman. She was curled up on the bed, just a little lump on the bed. I called all these guys in, every one of them. I named them. And in my mind, I put them in chairs like this. And I said, I have worked most of my life for you, and you guys owe me. And I pointed to my mother. I said, this is not an option. We're not going to do this. And 1 month later, she left her body. It was just very easily. I'd actually come to Italy. I was here. My sister called me, she just said, Mom died this morning. I said, good for her. Because it was over. She'd learned what she had to learn. It was done. But that rarely works, and I've never done it since. Most of the time, it just is what it is, and you have to go through it. Why do we think that's wrong? Because the ego, and the ego is not really our enemy. The ego is just part of the story. Ego is the infinite self identified with limitation. And that limitation begins with the physical body that we have. Think how many small self-definitions are because we think that we are this physical body, which gives us a culture, gives us an age, gives us a gender, gives us a biological family, just all these different things that we are. When I mentioned that I've never been very good at being a girl, but when I was 50, every time I got a haircut, I went to a different hairdresser because the haircuts just weren't coming out right. Even I could tell they weren't. And about the fourth or fifth hairdresser, she said to me like this, honey, everything gets old, including your hair. And what astonished me was not that I was getting older and my body was changing, but that I noticed and that I cared. I thought, oh my gosh, how many times, if I didn't die young, I had to die old. And how many times that I was female, I went through this. Like, oh, Lordy, do we never learn? Like that. But the part that's identified with the passing reality created by having a physical body, what comes with that is that we think good means easy and pleasurable. And even when people, even on the spiritual path, people will say, oh, that was good karma, that was bad karma. And what we always mean is that was easy and pleasurable, and this wasn't easy and pleasurable. Swami Kriyananda was very stern on that point in this way. He wasn't naive. God knows he had nothing but challenges all the way through, from beginning to end. And he never pretended. He never whitewashed it and said it was wonderful. I remember once we organized a program for Swamiji, but we made some critical mistakes. he had expected there to be a free lecture and then to be a paid series of classes, because that was how he found that people would sign up and pay. But we forgot about the free lecture and just started with the paid series, and 4 people came. And it was an hour and a half from where he was living. He was going to have to go now 4 weeks on this car ride for the 4 people. So we tried to make it okay. Well, Swami, I guess Divine Mother just sent the ones that she wanted to have come. Swami said, please allow a little room for human error. And when things were challenging, he didn't shine on. He was very, very authentic and sincere in the way he presented. But if in any way you questioned whether Divine Mother was doing what she wanted to have done, whether Master was taking care of him in the right way, he became extremely stern. At one time when, I don't remember what it was, but there was so much that was challenging, Swami went to the dentist and he didn't have any cavities, so his teeth were fine. And in English, there's an expression, I don't know if it translates, which says, thank the Lord for little favors. What that means is that, maybe lots of stuff is going wrong, but at least God was nice to me in this way. Okay, I said that just because I'm a dope sometimes. So I said that, thank the Lord for little favors, you have no cavities. He got just like this. I mean, it was just a casual remark, but when Swami would do that to you, you would listen. He just went completely like this, and he said, I thank God for everything that happens. Whoa. Because you see, all of those little attitudes collectively are the definition of who we are. Master said, take care of the minutes and the incarnations will take care of themselves. That's really a stunning thought, isn't it? Because we are defining ourselves minute by minute by minute by minute because of the chakras, which is a whole, big study in itself. Every thought, every action, every feeling, every response affirms this is what's real, this is what I believe in, this is what I think I need for happiness, this causes me pain. And we just do it casually all the time, not realizing that we are building our future. Because we create these vortices of energy within our chakras, and the vortex like that has an attracting power. So it will attract experiences to us that are the right karma for how we're vibrating. And also that vortex is like a whirlpool, like when a river is flowing, the river is flowing to the ocean, but garbage has fallen into a piece of it, or a rock or a tree. So the water's trying to get to the ocean, but some of it is just spinning. It's just spinning over here because there's some fixed point in the middle, and it keeps sucking the energy over. That's why we start out in a certain direction and end up over here. I mean, even I'm going to meditate for an hour and a half today. There I am meditating for an hour and a half, but I remember the pizza in the freezer. Just like, and all of a sudden you don't know where you're going to be. You're walking out to go to one place and you get distracted by those cute shoes in the window of the store. Or you suddenly remember how many times and then instead we end up like this. And all of these are our own decision, time after time after time. So we have to start with the basic assumptions. What is the purpose of shadow? It's not to pull us into darkness. It's to keep us from having such a small idea of our own potential that we're going to be 4 years old and live with mommy forever. And the Divine Mother, she just watches us, and she's amused by us. That's the other thing you have to realize. I often have people send me interesting death and return stories. There was one that I saw someone sent me recently. And the woman was a very eccentric kind of character who was telling this story. And she talked about the great light and the extraordinary feeling of being loved by God. But then she added this marvelous phrase. She said it like great surprise. She said, God not only loved me, which she said, I would have expected him to love me, meaning because of her understanding of metaphysics, but God actually liked me, is what she said. And then she sort of confessed, and you could see it, that a lot of people didn't like her because she was a little odd, you know, but God liked me. And when you see little children doing dopey things, strange things, but you're amused by them more than anything else, even when you have to correct them. Like Davy's little boy, I didn't do nothing, Mommy. Where? In the closet. We find that very amusing, even though it caused a great problem for her. Because it's game is not quite the right word, but it's not the real plot. The real plot is not that the real plot is that we are made for bliss and God is taking us there. And that's what the purpose of what we call shadow is. And shadow is a much better word than dark. You know, even in Master's poem Samadhi, it starts, vanished the veils of light and shade. You would think he would have said light and darkness, wouldn't you? But shade in English is another word for shadow. If you block the sun, then you create shade. You create a shadow. So what's happening in our lives is because of the attitudes that we have, we block the light. And then we think that we're in shadow. We think that the light has been withdrawn, but it can't be withdrawn. It can only be blocked. So even Master says, vanish the veils of light and shade. Light and what makes us think that we've lost the light. So the only plot is to remember the light. That's why Swamiji was so emphatic with me. Don't ever say that anything that's happening to you in your life is outside of God's will. And that will could be anything but filled with unconditional love for you and liking for you. Oh, we're going to have an adventure. You know, this is what the masters did to me, and I was annoyed with them. I got over it, of course. But it's like, no, we're going to have a big adventure now. It's going to be a hard one, but we'll be so, when we get to the other side, we'll be so glorious. So the question you have to ask yourself always when you wish to rebel is, do I just want to stay as I am forever? And this is also a powerful teaching when you see other people suffer. The first question I get is, what's going on in the world today, when I travel around and let people ask, and I'll let you ask questions in a minute, and you can ask it if you want. What's going on in the world today? Second question is, what about the suffering children? Because this is the dilemma, which is, what is happening here? And is it really good or bad? Let me think. I want to take a break, but I'm going to tell you this story before I do. This is not my own experience. This is an experience that was shared with me by a man that I know well for many years, but only through the internet. I've never met him in person. He's in his 80s now. He was an artist and a musician. And I guess what I'm saying is, I'm inclined to believe him. And even if this experience was not entirely, I mean, even to assume that there might have been some imagination in this, it doesn't matter because it's still true. I don't believe so. I think this happened. He's losing his sight, and he sometimes has these expanded stories. This took place. This was also during the time that in our school we were doing the play about Martin Luther King. It ties together, I'll tell you in a moment. Martin Luther King was the black man who started the civil rights movement and was assassinated in his late 30s. And the night before he was assassinated, he said, basically, like everyone, I wish for a long life, but I'm not looking for a long life. I'm looking for a life of meaning. And then 24 hours later, he was shot dead. So I had just heard him say this when I got this story. In the United States, you know, the United States I was in India one year, decades ago, when America went to war with someone. And seeing it from the other side, this Indian man said, "Oh, you Americans are always at war with someone." And I had to say, "Oh dear, that can be true, isn't it?" Well, as you know, America's at war with someone right now. And a few months ago, one of the American bombs, whatever its actual target was, hit a school. And there were like 150 girls in that school, and almost all of them were killed. Just horrible. And of course, it creates a certain, well, more than a certain, even people who are in favor, politically in favor of a war, it just breaks everybody's heart. You have to be inhuman not to feel it somewhere. So it helped create a certain revulsion against war, which is a tide that's coming in because we're moving into a higher age where people cannot take their happiness at the expense of other people's suffering. I mean, that is not what Divine Mother wants us to understand, that that's a karma that a lot of people have to learn. And their mothers' children too. And so we come to a planet where a lot of mothers' very naughty children are getting a chance to learn hard lessons. But the whole thing is to teach us. So this happens. So then he writes to me that he had there's the angel of wisdom who comes to him from time to time, takes him into the astral world. So he goes into the astral world. He sees the most beautiful meadow filled with flowers of a type he's hardly never seen before, filled with light, lots of darling little creatures, sweet little creatures, and about 150 girls who are all just having such a joyous time with the animals and the flowers and the sunshine and the beauty of it. And of course, he realizes that these are the girls who were just killed in this terrible bombing. Then the angel says to him, once they have had their fulfillment of playing, he said, they're going to do very serious spiritual work. And then they will be reborn in the same country, and they will be the instrument of peace for that country. No, it just takes the whole thing and changes it. Now, I start thinking about Martin Luther King. Like, he was so powerful and so courageous and sacrificed so much. He didn't get that way in one lifetime. He wasn't just born like that. He'd been working for many, many incarnations with that desire. Master said that Abraham Lincoln, who was the president of the United States, who took the U.S. to war to end slavery and liberated the slaves and ended slavery in America, Master said Abraham Lincoln had been a yogi in many lives who had great compassion for the suffering, the suffering caused by racial prejudice and slavery. And he was born as Abraham Lincoln so he could change that. And of course, he was assassinated too. So here you have these girls, and then you have this whole picture, like what kind of power, how do you develop the power to really remove the shadow and open up the light? You have to have something in you that is hard-earned. Like even my mother saying, this disease has been the making of me. It was not easy or pleasurable, but she could see what she'd gained from it. So these children, and then you think about their parents. Like, do their parents become angry and ever stronger warmongers? Or do they say never and again, never again? No one should ever experience this. So if all of that results in a gradually expanding light that these souls can actually serve and contribute, was it a bad thing that they were killed? You see how complicated it gets? If you see other people who are suffering, and we have come to understand that it is through suffering that we learn, would we rather they never learned? If this is the only way they're going to learn, do we want them not to learn? One friend of mine, unfortunately, never liked to hear her children cry. So she raised 2 crippled people because she was always protecting them from any sad thing that happened. Was that love?